Well, regardless of your age, you maybe have already had to deal with this thing we call grief. Maybe you've lost a grandfather at an early age, a parent, a loved one, a spouse, maybe even a child. But grief is not always about losing a person. Oftentimes, grief is something that happens when we lose a dream, we lose a job, we lose our identity, we lose our direction, we lose our way, we lose a boyfriend or girlfriend, a fiance, we lose our hope somewhere along the line, and we find ourselves looking again how to get back on that path, and this feeling of grief, this feeling of loss comes over us, and it just seems to sit there and weigh on us, and it's difficult to swim our way out. It's difficult to breathe sometimes. Well, in 1969, a woman by the name of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came up with 5 stages of grief. Counselors and psychologists and psychotherapists use these 5 stages often to help us understand and how we're feeling and why we're feeling as a result of a loss. Let's call it grief. The 5 stages of grief. They don't always happen in order. They don't all 5 always happen. And sometimes we bounce from one stage to the other until eventually, hopefully, time permitting, we find ourselves out of grief, moving on with our life in a new, full, and living way. First stage of grief is denial. Oftentimes we get the news that we've lost someone, we've lost something, we've lost our scholarship, we've lost everything we own, we're going bankrupt, we've lost our husband, we've lost our boyfriend. Whatever it is, it's pretty normal as an ego defense mechanism to say, I deny that, or I'm going to isolate, or I'm going to put that off. That's too much to deal with right now. I'm in a stage of denial. It's a way of protecting us from feeling incredibly bad. It's a way of protecting our heart from feeling incredibly sad. So this process of that can't be, or even mentally, we know what happened, and it's real, and we were at the funeral, we were there at the bankruptcy court, but we're almost in this mental fantasy land where that didn't really happen, or it's not as bad as it actually looks. Well, yeah, it is as bad as it actually looks. That person's not here anymore, and that money's not here anymore. Denial and isolation is a way of us kind of saying, it's not as bad as it looks, it's not real. Okay, well, that only works so long, and oftentimes it leads to this phase we call anger. Anger is a way of keeping ourselves from feeling this pain, because oftentimes we get angry at other things. We get angry at the deceased for the way they treated themselves. We get angry at objects. We get angry at groups of people. We get angry at another race. We get angry at the police. We get angry at the gang. We get angry at the bandit, the criminal, the murderer. We get angry at the doctor. Did they do all they could do? We begin to get angry at ourselves. I wish I'd said this. I wish I'd done this. I wish I'd been there for them. I wish I'd gone the extra mile during their therapy. But anger comes up, and the idea is to take the pain that we're feeling, we can no longer deny, and project it on someone else. Perfectly normal. That's part of the grieving process. Ross comes up with a 3rd stage of grieving called bargaining. What is this about? It is this mental gymnastics that takes place in our mind, is that if only I'd done this, if only I would have looked at it differently, if only I could have done something different. We bargain with ourselves. I didn't say this, I didn't say that. I'm going to play this game in my mind that, you know what, or maybe it was my fault, maybe it wasn't, maybe I can rationalize it. But in the end, as I barter and negotiate with myself, I'm going to end up feeling better about it. That's not angry. That's negotiations that takes place between your ears to somehow make all this tragedy and trauma and loss feel a little bit better. The 4th, almost inevitably, is going to happen to us, and this is that stage of depression. It's the stress of the unknown on how to go forward. It is the lack of clarity of the next step to get back on the path. How am I going to rebound from this? How am I going to do what the other person did that I never did? How am I going to do that which I'm not good at? How am I going to handle the legal issues? How am I going to pay for the funeral? And it leads to this empty, sad, immobilizing fear where we need other people around us to help us do things that we ourselves are not physically, emotionally, or spiritually ready to do. And it's being alone looks attractive. But aloneness, friend, eventually leads to loneliness. Busyness doesn't always cover up depression. Busyness doesn't always cover up bargaining. But there is this last step we call acceptance. Not everyone gets there in a mourning process. Oftentimes people don't. They spend their life denying, bartering and depressed, and they just never get to the acceptance stage. What is this? It is that piece of calm, that gift that somehow has been given you, that you've processed, you acknowledge, you accept, you're grateful, you're thankful for what you had, who you had, what you no longer have. There is a hope that you are the better for having been with that person or experienced that thing. And now it's time for you to move on. It's time for you to live. It's time for you never to forget, but you do have to live and to move on. Now, in the grieving process, I say this to you. Jesus said these words, and they're pretty profound. People of every religion recite these words. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Matthew 5:4. What does this mean? It means go ahead and mourn. Go ahead and feel. Go ahead and cry. Go ahead and shake your fist. Go ahead and bargain. Go ahead and be sad. Because if you're looking for God, I'll tell you where he's at. He's in the middle of it all. He's a man of sorrows. Jesus said, I'm a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. Don't look for God outside your grief. Look for God inside your grief. When you hurt, he hurts. When you need him near, he's already near. Don't go looking off that you're going to find some answer to your grief when you're beyond your grief. Let him be the answer in your grief. Those who mourn will be comforted. If you're not a person of faith and you don't have a relationship with Christ, I don't know your outlet, really. I don't know your way to comfort. I know where it's not. I know where people look for comfort. I know it's not there. There's a lot of ways to find comfort. It's not lasting. It's not meaningful. But having been on the both sides of being with and without Christ, and having grieved before I knew him and after I knew him, I can tell you by experience and testify to this. I'm a witness of the fact that he is in the pain. And he's no stranger to pain. And there's not a pain that you've ever experienced that he hasn't either. And by that I mean humiliation, disgrace, death, loss of a father, loss of friends, betrayal, public disgrace, physical abuse. He's handled all of those personally. And he experienced those things and knows about them personally. Therefore, go ahead and mourn. Go ahead and mourn and let him comfort you in the pain, because that's exactly where he is. If you're not a person of faith in your pain, I'd encourage you to call on his name, Jesus Christ, help me, and ease this pain and comfort me. Because the dark side of love, friend, is that it's very expensive when that person's gone. The cost of love is pain. Christ ought to know that, because out of love, he took pain on your behalf. Think about this as you mourn.